And welcome to a Sports Epilogue podcast. With me today is Matthew Horrigan. He is a Taekwondo athlete who has performed overseas. And today we will be dissecting the upcoming UFC events, primarily being Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz and Mark Hunt versus Brock Lesnar in his return to UFC. But first, we'll start off with the Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor fight at UFC 202. So, Matt, do you think Conor will win the second fight, or do you think the same troubles he had in the first fight will occur again in the rematch?
It's hard to say, Jono, but he'll definitely prepare to go the distance more so than try and knock him out early, I believe, because his punches, whilst they were heavy, weren't knocking Diaz as much as he probably figured. So, we'll see. I personally think it might be the same result as the initial fight.
It's a hard one because the matchup between them is totally different to what Conor McGregor is accustomed to at the featherweight division. He's accustomed to that weight of 145 pounds, whereas he went up 2 weight classes against Nate Diaz to 170 pounds. And in the Australian equivalent, I think that's worth 10 kilos. So that's a massive difference in the fight game, especially at an elite sport. I know you've had to do weight cuts yourself as a Taekwondo athlete. Is there a huge difference between making that weight, so 10 kilograms, in terms of the competition you're facing?
It is a significant difference, yeah. And that means Diaz also, whilst he has the mass advantage, he also has a reach advantage. And therefore, he can control the fight how he wants. Conor has to get inside to really hurt him. So, yeah, Conor's got his work cut out for him, that's for sure.
Yeah, he'll have to prepare adequately this time for, like you said, a guy who not just has the weight advantage, but also the reach advantage. And that's such a significant part of this matchup because they're both strikers at heart. So Conor, there was even talks of Conor McGregor potentially facing Floyd Mayweather Jr. in a boxing match. So that just shows the confidence Conor has, not just in fighting, but when he's standing up. He was exposed by Nate in their first matchup on the ground with a submission. And Nate Diaz is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, hailing from the Gracie Academy. So he's got that all under control, whereas McGregor will hopefully be training with his flaws because you can't just expect to trade with Nate Diaz standing up. You have to cover all bases because if it's on the ground and Nate has that advantage, then there's no point even going for the rematch. So that's something he'll definitely be practicing. Do you think he should still focus on his strength, which is the stand-up game, or how in a training session, how do you think he should weigh it up?
He should definitely work on his floor defense more so, just being able to get up from the ground, because he will win this fight off his feet because that's his strength. He's got to play to his strengths, and standing up, the stand-up game for him is the place he's going to win the fight. So if Nate gets him on the ground, he's just got to try and hang in there and get back up on the feet because he's not going to win this on the ground.
Yeah, and Nate Diaz, he's just so well-rounded, and a lot of people didn't realise just how good Nate Diaz was as a fighter before heading into this match with Conor McGregor. And one of the components about this was Conor was originally meant to fight Rafael dos Anjos for the 155-pound belt, and then there was a late change-up because he broke his foot. Nate Diaz came off 11 days preparation, and now he'll be training with a solid, 5-week or more training camp under his belt. So that's going to be a hard thing for McGregor. He'll come in more in shape than he did in the first bout. And you have to think, well, how is Conor going to win then? Is Conor going to, like you said, take advantage of him on the feet? Or will Nate, have a solid training camp with him? And he's known for his stand-up game. And he has experience in the weight class, whereas Conor's accustomed to the 145-pound division. So there's just so many factors to take into play. Do you think Conor's experience in the first fight will have an effect on the outcome in the second?
I think it'll be an advantage for Conor, but I still personally see the same outcome occurring. I think Nate's just going to be too strong for him. But certainly that first experience fighting at a heavier weight will sort of make him realise that he doesn't have the same power that he commands in the featherweight division. So he's going to have to look to other avenues and try and go as long and hard as he can. But like I think in the first fight, he blew over too early. He worked too hard too early and ran out of steam in the end, unfortunately. So yeah, he needs to work on that for the second fight.
Yeah, so he needs to have that tactical awareness. It's a 5-round fight, so this could go the distance. I mean, both fighters have great chins, so they don't get knocked out easily. And especially the Diaz brothers. I mean, not just Nate Diaz, but Nick Diaz as well. They were born in Stockton, where it's notorious for, not being one of the most pleasant neighborhoods in America, one might say. And Conor McGregor comes from Ireland. And it's really, as much as it's a battle between the two fighters, it's a battle of culture as well. And you see that. Did you see the Stockton slap Nate Diaz did against Conor McGregor in the fight? Yeah. I mean, that's just a mental edge Nate Diaz has over Conor. The fact that he does have the first win, having a proper training camp behind him, because he came to the first fight, I think he was drinking alcohol or something.
He was underdone, yeah, that's for sure.
He posted like an Instagram video of him drinking alcohol before he even got the call up. Yeah. So he was kind of mocking the preparation he made. He made the comment to Joe Rogan after the fight. Joe Rogan's a UFC commentator, that if he had a training camp, he probably wouldn't have been touched. And he waited for the first round to really get a sense of Conor's power. But even then, that's a dangerous thing. The one thing that Conor has, which Nate Diaz doesn't, is those heavy hands. He's got a lethal left hand, which can knock people out. Conor knocked Jose Aldo out in 13 seconds. Do you think a knockout is a possibility?
Oh, well and truly, yeah. I mean, it's always a possibility in every fight. If someone takes a step and misjudges their distance, or loses, sort of, they get complacent, it can happen like that, so quickly. So anything's possible in this fight. I guess it's hard to. I personally think that Diaz will win again, but it's so hard to pick, because anything can happen. It's one of those things. It's just, I mean, on their day, either one of them can win. So
when you look at the odds and you had to bet, you would definitely tip Nate Diaz. And the other thing as well, Nate Diaz, he hasn't been knocked out with a punch ever in his professional mixed martial arts career. And he's trained with guys such as Joe Schilling and Andre Ward. Like, we're talking not just ordinary strikers, but the pinnacle of their professions. There's nothing that Conor's going to do which Nate hasn't felt before. And with that comes the confidence, because confidence is such an integral thing in the fight game. Coming into this fight, Conor was on, I think it was on an 8-fight win streak, something around there, had all the confidence in the world. But when he lost against Nate Diaz, that aura of invincibility that Conor once had was just gone, because he was beaten by Nate Diaz. It proved that, he's human. Like, he can't just knock everyone out. Going up 2 weight divisions is a huge leap. So when you're fighting, Matthew, do you try and weight cut excessively to get down to a division where your body is lighter than it normally should, or do you try and not cut so much?
I personally don't cut a whole heap. I mean, it depends what my natural body weight's probably 84, 85 kilos, and I get under 80 kilos, so I lose about 4 kilos. But it's significant for me, but in comparison to a lot of these guys fighting professional UFC, it's 4 kilos is nothing. So they cut a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But I don't. I mean, if it's just where you're comfortable, it's a personal choice, really.
I'm telling you right now, Conor does not look comfortable in the featherweight division. If you see him at weigh-ins, he looks so dehydrated. 145 pounds is the equivalent of around 68 kilos. he's a big guy. If you look at him, he's just naturally well built, and he's obviously worked hard to get that body shape. But that just proves as well how much he has to cut, and that must play a factor when he's preparing for a fight. You're not just training for what you have to prepare for in the actual fight. You have to prepare to actually make the weight. In the 170-pound division, he didn't have to worry about that. He weighed in at 168 pounds instead of just making the 145-pound limit. He even says it's so hard to make that weight. Do you ever see Conor competing in the featherweight division again?
Yeah, for sure. He'll defend his belt in there. I just think he wants to really try and knock off Diaz first and foremost in this division. But I can see him returning to featherweight, although he has beaten just about everyone in there worth fighting. So, I mean, and he probably go up to 155, is it? Eventually. But I can see him going back to defend his title at least.
It's such a tough weight cut for him, though. I don't see, because he wanted to have 2 belts in 2 different weight divisions originally. So that was the 155-pound belt. And the difference between 145 pounds and 155 pounds, I think, is about 4 kilos, roughly. So it just means that you don't have to spend that much of your energy trying to cut down. But then again, the competition is arguably weaker because you're going down a lighter weight division. And that's why you have pound for pound rankings as well. I do see him defending his featherweight title. I'm troubled that Conor is actually getting this rematch. I think he owes it to the featherweight division to actually defend his belt. Imagine being Jose Aldo, who just got knocked out in 13 seconds. And he was the champion for so many years, had so many title defenses. Conor hasn't even defended his belt yet, and yet he's fighting Nate. Do you think that rematch will happen between Jose and Conor?
Potentially. Depends on how Jose goes against Edgar. So I think that he has to defeat Edgar first and the winner of that fight should get the rematch. The title challenge against Conor.
Do you find it unfair, though, that Conor's not immediately defending his belt?
To a degree, it can be seen as that way, but I also understand where he's going, and I think that if you're in that featherweight division, you've got to bide your time because he'll be back there. I'm sure of it anyway. So he needs to come back and defend his title, but I think he's just having a crack at UFC 200. Well, it's not 202.
Yeah.
First and foremost, and then after that, he'll go and prepare for the title defense.
As much as it's potentially unfair to a degree, as you said, it also shows the character of Conor to actually go up 2 weight classes. I mean, the amount of courage that he has, you don't see that in fighting at the high level, especially when the Rafael dos Anjos fight was just scrapped because of injury. Conor, he said, let's get Nate Diaz in the octagon, let's make it 170 so he can actually make the weight. So that's a true fighter, someone who doesn't really care about weight so much, but just wants to fight. And I admire Conor for that. But at the same time, I'm quite objective here. I think he needs to, in the first instance, defend his belt. Jose Aldo's resume speaks for itself. I mean, his title defenses came against, Chad Mendes, Frankie Edgar. He's already beaten Frankie Edgar. He's beaten just as many people as Conor has beaten in the featherweight division. In fact, more. So I think even though it was a knockout, I agree that he could have fought Rafael. After the loss against Nate Diaz, I suspected he should have gone back to a rematch with Jose Aldo. That was just my thoughts. I know some people have a differing opinion that he deserves a rematch because he made the fight with Nate Diaz happen. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts on that. And also another fight which is happening at UFC 200, which was a bit of a surprise in a lot of ways, is the Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt fight. And Brock Lesnar is coming off quite a long layoff. We're talking more than a few years here. where he's just competed at WWE instead of competing in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC. So what kind of factor will that play in the upcoming fight against Mark Hunt? Mark Hunt is coming off a walk-off KO, which he's notorious for, against Frank Mir in Sydney, Australia, I think.
It was Brisbane.
Oh, it was Brisbane, sorry. And so he's got lots of confidence. In fact, I think he's coming off two KOs in a row.
Yeah, he just, before that, knocked out in the rematch Bigfoot Silva.
And you went to that match.
Yeah, I was there. I was in Melbourne. So that he's in top shape at the moment, Mark Hunt. This is his last shot for a heavyweight title. I think he's ranked 8 at the moment, but if he beats Lesnar, I think he'd be 1 or 2 fights off having a title shot. And he's in killer form at the moment, and I expect that to continue. He's
ranked number 8 in the rankings, but Brock is not even in the top 10 because obviously he's had that huge layoff. So it's not actually going to do anything to his numerical ranking. But what it will do is it will give him the exposure that he really needs to
Brock's
potentially
been a heavyweight champion in the past, so it's going to it's really show that he's got a serious opportunity to be the heavyweight champion if he's knocked out a former heavyweight champion who was unbeatable for a brief period of time.
Absolutely, and what an extraordinary transition that was to come from the WWE, which is entertainment-based, to the fight game, which is extremely dangerous, competing at the heavyweight division, which is the top division in the UFC, versing killers like Cain Velasquez, Randy Couture. So he's beaten these legends. Oh no, he hasn't beaten Cain. He lost against Cain. He lost against Frank Mir as well, but he also beat Frank Mir
in a rematch. He was also, though, you are forgetting, he's in the NCAA college wrestling. I think he won 110 wrestling fights and lost only 4 of them or something. So he was almost unbeatable in a college wrestling, like serious wrestling level. So he had the pedigree to step into the UFC and be a successful athlete.
Yeah, it's not something like CM Punk now, where CM Punk has a background, I think, in Kempo, but he hasn't had a professional fight in his mixed martial arts career to date, and he's stepping straight up into the UFC. Whereas, like you said, Brock was an American state champion, and he won over 100 fights in his wrestling career. So he actually had a pedigree in fighting. And wrestling is such a dominant form in mixed martial arts because if you're powerful at wrestling, you can get opponents to the ground more easily than another mixed martial arts form can. And that's going to be a factor in this fight. Can Brock Lesnar take Mark Hunt to the ground? Because standing up, Mark Hunt is so lethal.
He's a striker at heart. That's his game. So Mark Hunt has that one-punch knockout ability, and I think that will continue. I think he has excellent takedown defense as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he combats the Lesnar takedown attempts. But I personally think that he will knock Lesnar out, possibly even in the first round.
Yeah. I mean, that's an astute choice because if you're looking at it on paper, Brock's had that layoff. And, I mean, you have to look at, whether ring rust will have a huge factor coming into this fight. Brock Lesnar made the jovial comment, in my opinion, that the ring rust will come off when Mark Hunt punches him, just so, he's aware. But one could argue that could be the knockout punch, which... Yeah,
well, all Mark Hunt needs is one punch to connect, and that's it. And he's got a chin on him too, Hunt. He can take a hit. So.
Oh, yeah. As proven in that... you're talking about Bigfoot Silva before, the very first match. You were the one who showed me the fight. And that match was arguably one of the best UFC fights to have ever been shown to date.
I think it's been voted the best heavyweight fight in UFC history, I think. But yeah, it was unreal.
Because it was 5 rounds... And
they just slugged it out and hit each other continuously, just pounded each other, and they went the whole way. And like it was a draw, deservedly. So they both came out on top.
So I mean, that's just. Can you envisage a draw with Mark Hunt and Brock Lesnar?
No, it'll be finished.
Yeah.
I reckon in the first couple of round 1 or 2, I expect Mark Hunt will knock him out. But then again, if Lesnar does get it on the ground, he's got the serious advantage here. So, I don't think Mark Hunt will get taken down that easily.
He's got the athleticism to trouble Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt's game is predominantly based on power, which is frightening in itself because he boasts that knockout power. One punch can end it, which is why I found Brock's comment funny that he said it might take that one punch from Mark Hunt just to wake me up. No, that punch is the one that could send you asleep, literally. And he's proven that.
Many times.
Yeah, and he has that, and he has a great chin, like you said, Mark Hunt. He can actually take a punch. It's whether he can block, and he also has good takedown defense, but Brock Lesnar has that wrestling pedigree that most other UFC fighters don't have. He's won over 100 fights. I mean, and that's a dangerous proposition coming up for Mark Hunt. But you look at the match he had against Frank Mir, and Frank Mir was trying to take him to the ground, but he couldn't because, Mark Hunt was just very steady in his stand-up game and very balanced, and he was just sticking to his strengths. But Brock Lesnar is a completely different animal, really.
The way I see it is that Brock has to get inside Mark Hunt's distance, though, in order to take him down. And that's where you don't want to be if you're fighting Mark Hunt. If you're in his distance, he can time a punch that perfectly that whilst Brock might be halfway through trying to take him down, he might be out on the floor before he's even touched Mark Hunt because his timing on his punches are just unparalleled.
Exactly. And one of the things about this matchup is that the age difference, there's 4 years between them, but they're both experienced fighters. Brock Lesnar, obviously, I think he's only competed at 8 events or around in UFC. He had one before that, before he started out. And Mark Hunt has a lot of experience in the UFC. And Mark Hunt's 42 years of age. So it just shows you the perseverance that he has and that the ambition is still there to potentially win the title. And so that's going to be a big factor, the motivation levels, because Brock, this might just be a one-off thing. He has to actually go back. He actually has to fulfill his contract. So that's an advantage to Mark Hunt. Like he'll be more motivated in training, definitely, to try and get that title shot, which... Didn't he have a previous title shot against Fabricio Verdum?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think he was actually doing quite well until he got knocked out with a knee.
Yeah, it was unfortunate, but he, and that sort of dropped him back down the rankings, and he hit a slump for a long time, lost a lot of fitness, wasn't in fighting condition for a lot of events, and I think he was pretty close to giving it away, and he went over to, I believe it was Thailand, or it might have been Thailand or Korea, and did a real serious training camp over there, got himself back into top shape, probably arguably the best shape of his career, and since then he has been unstoppable. I mean, it's surprising that, at 42 years of age, that he's actually competing at the top of the weight division. But it's not unheard of at the same time. Dan Henderson, who's 45, just knocked out Hector Lombard, who I think he has an Australian background. He's predominantly Croatian. Yes.
Yeah. But that was surprising. And we just saw Michael Bisping, who's 37, knock out Luke Rockhold, who's about 30. So it's not unheard of now for... to be in your high 30s or even 40s, rather. Anderson Silva's still competing and still compete with the best. And the fact that Mark Hunt is doing that just shows he is a dangerous proposition. So you see Mark Hunt winning the fight?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
I do see probably a knockout happening. At the same time, Brock Lesnar is a wrestling machine. He's won over 100 fights, like you said, in his amateur wrestling career, and he's built massively, and he has that athleticism at heavyweight which not a lot do. What did you make of Mark Hunt's comments that he thought Brock Lesnar was juiced to the gills?
Oh, I think they're an attempt to get under his skin a little bit. The reasoning behind them with the UFC sort of waiving his need to get drug tested because it's just a one-off fight for him because he's going back to the WWE. But it is unfair on Mark Hunt's part because of the fact that he hasn't been tested.
Anderson Silva, arguably one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time, tested positive, not once, but twice in drug tests. And they've implemented a harsher drug testing regime. Of course, Anderson Silva denies the allegations, though. He had positive drug tests. He said it was due to a personal medical reason. As a matter of fact, Mark Hunt's opponent, who he last fought, Frank Mir, was found to take a performance-enhancing drug. Not sure if it was a steroid. Frank Mir said it possibly may have been something to do with the meat in Australia and how supplements can be ingrained in meats, and he didn't intentionally take it. And sometimes it can be true. I mean, we just don't know. Into a separate topic, but a related point, Maria Sharapova was found to have taken an enhancing substance. She said she didn't intentionally try to cheat as well. But Roger Federer made the point that in sport in general, athletes should be culpable when they put something into their body. Do you think that applies here in MMA?
Yep, well and truly.
Even if they generally didn't intentionally try to cheat?
Look at it through any code, any sport. It should be that the athlete knows what's going into their body, and they're responsible for what goes into their body. So you look at it, you can argue the same point for Essendon. The players, whilst it wasn't fair on them, but they should have known what was going into their body. And you look at Olympic medalists and stuff like that. What we used to see, our Aussie boy Talent just got his gold medal, which he was robbed of because of the winner of the London Games in the walk was tested positive to performance enhancing drugs, so he just got his gold medal. So it's in all sports codes. What goes into the athlete's system is the athlete's responsibility.
Yeah, and that's why I see Mark Hunt taking exception to the fact that Brock Lesnar is exempt. I don't think he's exempt from drug testing as of now, but in the lead up, you're meant to have drug tests in the lead up, so we're talking about months before, and because the Brock Lesnar fight was made in a haste, because obviously Conor and Nate, they were meant to fight at UFC 200, and UFC 200 marks another century from UFC 100. And traditionally, that's where the most stacked cards come in, the most exciting fights. So they had to organise the Brock one on the fly, really.
But more importantly, it needs to be amended so that everyone is rigorously tested.
At the heart of it, do you think that Brock Lesnar should just not be allowed to compete at UFC 200?
No, I think I can understand the reason behind it. Because of the fact that the fight was made so quickly, they can't go back in time and test him in the lead up. So there's not much they can do. They can start testing him now, but that's probably all that can be done. But in the future, I think all athletes who are on a roster or have been on the roster should be tested following up.
Because it's not just in competition testing, it's out of competition testing too. And that's where you can get... I had Sam Beckman. I know you know who Sam Beckman is. He's a martial arts fighter. And he was telling me that the misconception that people can get about steroids is the fact that, it makes them stronger, which it does do. But at the heart of it, it allows them to recover quicker. And so that means you can go into the next training session with more renewed energy than you had before and gain an advantage over your rival. Not when you're approaching the fight, but before that.
Through the training camp.
And that's huge. That's a huge advantage. Not many people realize just how brutal a training camp is. I mean, they go for weeks on end, days on end, and you have to prepare adequately. Have you had a training camp before?
Oh, I have, but not to the same degree as these people. I've just done post-competition ones where we go and train with a team from another country, or another country comes to us, a national team, and we train with them. But this, like the stuff they go through where they go and just have a 5-week block of just non-stop hard work, I haven't done that. Not really. I've only done one over a few days or a week pretty much. So, yeah, but it's very tough for them.
Yeah. I mean, and would you need to focus on like rehydration methods and
diet and rehydration and and recovery is really important.
Our final predictions: Nate to win by submission.
I think Nate, submission, or it could even be knockout. But I think Nate will win.
Mm-hmm. Mark Hunt and Brock both think Brock.
No, I think Mark Hunt will win.
Mark Hunt. At the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if Brock gets up.
Oh, it could go either way.
Yeah.
Just like the other fight.
Just like any other fight, isn't it? That's the thing about mixed martial arts. You don't just specialize in one area. Like, say, Floyd Mayweather in boxing, you have to worry about the ground game. You have to worry about the stand-up game. And that's why, on a sub note, I don't understand the Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor matchup. Conor specializes in different martial art forms, whereas Floyd Mayweather is just a predominant boxer. In a real fight, we all know who would win, pretty much. I'd just like to say thank you to Matt for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jono.
And I hope you enjoyed this Sports Epilogue podcast.